これより本セッションの締めとしてディスカッションを行いたいと思います。進行はジョージ・ワシントン大学教授マイク望月先生にお願いしたいと思います。望月先生、お願いいたします。
Thank you very much. I want to thank all the panelists for a very rich and provocative and very interesting presentation. We really don't have much time for a full discussion, so I just want to ask one question and have all of you give a response. A very famous political scientist in the United States wrote a book called The Tragedy of Great Powers, and looking at hundreds of years of world history, every time that there is a major transition in the power balance, this has led to war. Today we've heard a relatively optimistic picture. Professor Yang said that now a great power war is unthinkable. Professor Michishita suggested that the possibility of a high-intensity conflict is not very likely. And yet, when I listened to you, Professor Scher, you seemed a lot more uncertain. It's not inevitable that there might be a conflict between the United States and China, but it's much more uncertain. And so the question is, to make the possibility of a conflict much less likely, you proposed that there has to be some kind of final settlement between the United States and China. And then listening to Professor Lin, you suggested that there might be a possibility of using international law or even the possibility of joint economic development to deal with some of the issues in the East China Sea as a way out. So I wanted to ask all the panelists whether the solutions of law, economics, or even this final settlement between the United States and China are attractive ways of avoiding a major military collision, or are there other ways that one can think about? So who would like to go first? Well, since you proposed that, Professor Scher, maybe I can ask Professor Michishita on his views on a final settlement between the United States and China and how Japan might feel about that.
米中間のファイナルセトルメントができるかどうかというのは非常に面白い問いかけではあると思いますが、これは事実上不可能だと思いますし、やることは危険だと思っています。というのがなぜかと言いますと、ファイナルセトルメントをやるということになると、事実上ステータスクオというか現状維持国、今有利な立場にあるアメリカが追っかけている中国に相当の譲歩をするということがほぼ不可避になってきますね。でそうするとそれは中国にとっては多分アメリカが折れてきた、アメリカはもう弱い立場だっていうふうな印象を与えることになりますし、中国にとってはプッシュすればもっと取れるっていう印象を与えることになります。これは本当にマイナスの結果を生み出してしまうと思っています。そういう意味で、今回これから米中関係、日本もそのアクターの一つですが、かなり長い競争、この厳しい嫌な状況が相当長く続くというのをもう覚悟する必要があると思います。でそれを覚悟した上で、その先に何かより安定的な環境が生まれてくるのをもうひたすら待って我慢してペイシェンス、我慢、忍耐というのが最も重要なこれからの一つの政策を考える上での要素になってくると思っております。
Professor Yang or Professor Lin, do you have some thoughts on this?
It is true that historically power transition had often led to great power conflict and wars. But here I would like to suggest that currently this does not have to be the only outcome. In terms of economic integration, the world has greatly changed, but in terms of power relation, it's still lagging behind. And therefore, there's a disconnect between the new norms of security and the traditional approaches to power. And that's what I consider to be a disconnect. If you look at Europe, Germany had been the rising power and upset international balance and caused war. But after World War II, we have a different kind of Europe where German and French reconciliation had provided the peace for Western Europe. So with new norms and new structural guarantees, it does not have to produce the same kind of outcome as in the past.
Thank you. Professor Lin, how do you think Taiwan will look at the possibility of a U.S.-Chinese accommodation, some kind of final settlement to avoid conflict?
When Assistant Secretary Danny Russell was here in Japan, in Beijing, in September this year, he was very much concerned regarding the number 2 largest economy and number 3 largest economy, the PRC and Japan, have the tension over the island in the East China Sea. And he mentioned that the global economy is too fragile to have this kind of tension going on without any possible solution. So for the United States, has very critical role to play. And I read an article written by National Defense University professor in Beijing. He argued that if the tension could be controllable without going further, the middle-scale military confrontation, and it might be possible for the U.S. not to intervene and let the tension to be settled only between Japan and the PRC. It's quite difficult to have the long-term solution, but we should consider more regarding the crisis prevention or the damage control. And looking back, in June 2008, the PRC and Japan have the joint cooperation or exploration zone in the middle of the East China Sea. That only happened about less than 5 years ago, but that agreement did not implement as planned. So it's very important for the U.S. to stay neutral regarding the dispute. And also it's very critical imperative for Beijing and Japan not to take further provocative action regarding the step in the water. And in that regard, try to cool off that time play. I stop there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And finally to you, Professor Shi. Professor Michista thought that your proposal for a U.S.-China final settlement rather than solving the problem is dangerous. How would you respond to that?
I would have to say that liberal theory is wonderful. But you look at, East Asia and Pacific this time, we found the most important fact is that, and at the same time of increasing economic, financial, and other interdependence between China and the United States, and a strategic rivalry between more comprehensive, more profound, and more pronounced. This is dialect of this region. And I think that at the bottom, China's strategic goal is limited. And I think that China only wants a narrow so-called strategic space compatible with China's magnitude, China's power, and Chinese people's aspiration. Very limited, and just I describe it. And the United States, if China not push too far and broken U.S. vital interest bottom line, which I think is very likely not China will not to do. And over years, and at most I think that 20 years, the United States will recognize there should be some reform, a limited reform of strategic order in the Western Pacific. China don't want very much. And Okinawa is, Guam is the United States. Okinawa, at least at this ugly time, Chinese foreign affairs ministers have not challenged Japanese sovereignty over Okinawa. This is only make some questions, the ugly times. China don't want. But China cannot tolerate, Chinese people cannot tolerate a great power China with this magnitude and 1.3 billion people. If in war condition, we cannot go even into Western Pacific. So I think the United States finally will recognize this. And I think that accompanying with China's rise, and the U.S. may be financially and relative decline and trade decline in this region, I think that the final settlement, peacefully conducted, is although not likely, but have an increasing possibility. And the United States will protect its partnership, protect their interests. China will, pursue the United States. And some of the U.S. vital interests maybe is a little too much touch on China's vital interests. I still think that this peaceful final settlement is increasingly possible. But still, I point out, there's another ominous alternative. I don't think that the so-called the power transition and accommodation between great powers are so easy. And even we have this so-called globalized world.
Thank you very much. I'm afraid I have to bring this panel to a close because we're out of time, but please join me in thanking all the panelists for a terrific presentation. Thank you.